So there's a new set of headlines about automation and AI coming for our jobs. But this time, the data is telling a very different story than many of the ones you'll find out there. Now, this is coming out of a 31-page study from an organization called RemoteLabor.ai. And it was all about some pretty comprehensive testing they did on AI agents and how it performs related to actual paid human work. And as a teaser, at best, AI did about 2% of the tasks correctly. Not 25%, not 50%, 2.5%. And that was the best, which means if you're thinking of replacing your people one-to-one with AI, just know you're considering swapping a full human for about 2.5% of one at best. That's where automation is right now. That is insane. But before we start celebrating, there's more to this research than meets the eye, and it raises some tougher questions, which we need to dig into before we move forward. Because while it might make you pause on layoffs and hold off what you're doing or rethink what you're doing with automation, it doesn't mean we should throw the idea of automation out the window. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And this week, I'm going to be digging into this RemoteLabor.ai study and talking about what this study actually reveals to us about AI and automation and agents and their capabilities, and also what it doesn't, but more importantly, what you should be doing in response to some of this, especially amidst all the noise and conflicting information out there. Because this is a research report that every leader, every professional really should care about if you care about using AI effectively without losing your edge. Now, if you find content like mine helpful, would you do me a favor and follow, subscribe, share this with somebody who would benefit from it? It really helps me get this content to the people who need it most. And if you are so inclined and you get enough value out of it, or you go, man, I just love this, Christopher. I'd love to take you out for lunch or buy you a bag of almond M&Ms, which I'm always open to that as well. You can actually do that by going to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind, and you can actually say thank you with financial support over there. Okay, so let's get into it because I do want to break down some of what's in this report. Now, you can go check it out on your own. It's at RemoteLabor.ai, and you can, if you just search for, it's called the Remote Labor Index, and you'll be able to find this research. It's basically 31 pages, so it's not one of the longer research ones. Actually, only 18 of them are the details of the research. There's actually lots of very visual examples that help illustrate what this research shows. And it's worth checking out, but I want to focus on the parts that are most important. And what it did is it looked at 240 different freelance projects across 23 different categories. So there was some design work, there was architecture, product design, they did some animation, data analysis. I mean, there was a whole bunch of different stuff. So they really did a nice broad spectrum of testing of the kind of work you might grab a gig worker for to come in and do things. And the study covered about 6,000 human hours, about $140,000 worth of project value. So this was not, slim pickings. These weren't just like, hey, make me a logo type of a thing. It was actual work that you would typically pay somebody to go do. And they tested it against a whole barrage of agentic AI. So Grok was in there, Sonnet, Manus, GPT-5, ChatGPT's agent, Gemini Pro, all of this. And one thing to note was that they compared humans doing the work to the agent doing the whole thing, end to end. Okay, so this was not a study of human augmentation. I couldn't tell from the research if the freelance workers were required to not use any AI tools to help them with what they're doing. So again, I want to be clear on the limitations of the study, but it was looking at if we were to take something we would go to a human for and pay them real money for and say, here's what we need from you, versus if we just went to an AI agent, gave it all the details and said, come back with your final product. What would you do? Okay. And it was a straight up comparison of this. And it was interesting. The top automation rate, the one that got the best results. Okay. And I'm going to pull this chart up for it because I think it illustrates it. Okay. Manus was 2.5. That was the best. Now, if you look at these other ones, like they drop all the way down to 0.8%. Okay. So if you were to go to a human and ask for this versus an agent might give you, a Gemini might give you back 0.8% of what a human would give you. Now, I actually think the chart that they included in there is slightly misleading in that those little dashes up at the top kind of make it look like, hey, that's pretty close to 100%. If you were to blow this chart out all the way from 0 to 100%, these percentages would be so small. You'd probably need to get out your monocle to like figure out where they landed on the chart. Okay. So they didn't crush it. Let's just say that they did not crush it. So some of the things that like AI is on the verge of being able to one for one do what a human does. That is not what the research came out. Now, they also did some other things where they looked at ELO scores, where basically it has to do with, how capable is it? And, humans are given a score of 1,000. Based on the, objective scales they use, AI came back at about half as capable. Okay, so even in terms of capability, AI was about half, but then that half capability translated into producing real work ended up falling out anywhere between 0.8% and 2.5%. All right. Now, we'll talk about what that all means and how you should be thinking about this, because I can already hear people listening to this, and you could look at the headlines. They're like running in one of two directions, and I want to bring people back to the center and go, hold on, folks. Like let's talk and think this through. Now, something else that was actually really interesting in this research that is worth calling out, that I actually haven't seen anybody address, but I think it's really interesting, is they actually tried two different methods of agental AI. One was command line, which is what most of us are more familiar with in terms of like, your text prompting this, where maybe you give it a full blown prompt and say, here, go do all this, versus it's trained on computer use, which, it watches somebody do it on your screen. And it's kind of when you give ChatGPT the ability to take over your screen, or some of these AI tools that can interact with your browser tabs and your apps. And what was really interesting is you might think that the computer use agents, the ones that are actually in the tools using the capabilities versus just getting a text input and doing it, you might think the computer use ones would perform better, that are clicking through the actual apps. They did not. Actually, the text prompt, it actually worked better to just tell and describe to AI everything you needed to do, and then let it go do it with the tools and resources it has access to on its own independently. Which, again, that's not what this was studying, but it was an interesting insight that came out of it as you're thinking about some of the decisions and even just some of the ways we think about where we're going to get more bang for our buck out of AI and agental AI as we think about it. Some of the things that you'll see, I highly encourage you to go look at the research report. It's very interesting. Look at some of the screenshots and stuff. AI consistently shared incomplete or corrupted files. It was just inconsistent. It was all over the map in terms of quality. Like one in particular this comes to mind is this like product, pitch for earbuds. And you look at the earbuds and you're like, whoa, like you even got reference images, and that's what you came back with. So they were pretty rough, and the formatting was all over. And it's worth noting that these projects weren't, like I said, these were not, hey, I'm a tech podcaster, create me a logo. And then, you normally would pay $2 on Fiverr and get some, click art or clip art, back. And you're like, hey, I could do a better job than that. That's not what they were doing with this. This was like serious work. The projects ranged from like up to 10K and 100 hours. So these were serious work, which, if you follow the industry, a lot of the noise out there is that AI is capable of one-to-one replacing humans, or pretty darn close to that, which has business leaders making a lot of decisions off of that. And this data just rips the mask off of it. Okay. So while AI is improving, we are nowhere near full-blown autonomous AI. But I think it's worth addressing, and this is where I want to spend the rest of the podcast. There's a bigger story, because it's not about what it can do or how easily we've been fooled into thinking, what it can do. There's a lot of so what's behind it, but that's what the research is. Again, I would encourage you to go check it out and look at it. But let's talk now. Let's transition over into the so what, because I think there's 3 really actionable insights that everyone can walk away, whether you're a business decision maker, whether you're a C-suite leader, a business owner, or you're just an individual going, okay, so how do I respond to this? I think the first one is the idea that AI can one-to-one replace a human, and the data comes back with 2%, 2.5% at best automation. That's like, the gap there is delusion. And we need to call that for what it is. If you are someone who is actively replacing people with AI right now, you need to understand you are replacing 100% of a person with 2%, 2.5% of that person. And I would actually argue it's significantly less than that, because when you told AI, like in this study, when you told AI to do that, there was no like, they're picking up extra slack over here, they're doing these other things, they're filling the gaps in other areas. So I would actually argue 2.5% would be a very, very, very generous assumption of how much AI is automating something. That is in an instance where you're going, here is this one thing that I am giving you explicit instructions on doing. Now, please go do that for me without any additional input and support. Came back 2.5%. So if you are currently planning, budgeting, in the process of doing full-on replacement, full stop. And I mean that with all the intensity that I am trying to communicate right now, because on the surface, I will admit, these models, they look productive and fast and clean, and it looks like it can be on brand. But it became very apparent through this research that you don't have to look very far beneath the surface before the cracks start showing. And you can start to see, even if you don't have expertise in the area, you're seeing the missing logic and the shallow analysis and the broken visual. Like, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to very quickly go, now, wait a minute here. There's something wrong with what this generated. And like I said, 2.5% best case scenario. And I think you need to think about how that risk just continues to amplify, because it's not just about the fact that you may hand something off to an agent and get 2.5% back what you would have had you handed this off to a person. It's that this stuff kind of compounds because of the invisible nature of it. It gets further down the line before you catch it. Can you imagine if you were an organization that asked an agent to do some of this freelance work and then didn't take the time to look at it and got in front of a client? I'm telling you, if you see some of these examples, you could destroy your entire brand by bringing some of this stuff forward. And you might go, well, we would never do that. Well, that's not necessarily true, and it's happening. And, the other thing that came clear from this is it wasn't really clear where this was coming from or how it was pulling this up. So the plagiarism, the hallucinated data, like all of this stuff compounds with it. And the one thing that I just thought as I was looking at the results of all this is how much work is going to go to clean up the mess on some of these things. Like, I looked through some of these case studies and I was like, if you had to fix it along the way, it would still be work. If you just got this product back, and let's say you were expecting a client-ready deliverable, and you got handed back to you what some of these agents created, you'd spend multiples in terms of time and resources to clean. Like, you basically would have to throw the whole thing out and go, we're starting from scratch, except now we spent all this time writing the right prompt and describing this to AI and all this stuff, and we paid no attention to what it did in the process. Like, you would be starting, I would actually say, before the ground zero. So in terms of this one, like in terms of practical actions, and I think it's not about malice. It's not that AI is doing this stuff wrong. It's just we are confusing looking productive with being productive. And I think that's the real insight and risk that this research brought out. And so if, like I said, if you are in full stage swap out people for AI mode, which I know many organizations are, you need to pause any one-to-one replacement plans that you have. Just do it. You will thank me later. I promise you. And you need to then go back and actually make sure you've done, maybe you have, but I'm telling you to pause and check that you have mapped the human value, that you understand the context, the iteration, make sure you understand what this is. And if you are proceeding with automation, you would want to very much do some internal testing first. And again, pause. Have you done that? Have you validated? Have you validated more than like a one-time best case scenario? And you go, well, yeah, we're pretty sure it can handle this kind of stuff. And then I would encourage everybody to radically shift that mindset and rebuild around the idea of augmentation, not elimination of people, and moving towards this. We're just going to have agents doing the work of people. Maybe we'll get there, but this was a pretty jarring. We are not there. So do a full stop audit. Don't just look at efficiency by, did it save us money? You have to look at it by the capability that it delivered and the quality of what it's creating. And this was a very jarring insight into that. Now, you might think, okay, well, Christopher, you're saying, okay, full on stop with the automation, right? That's what you're saying, full on stop of automation. It's augmentation only. Not so fast. Not so fast. And I think it's fair that we actually have to address some of the nuance and complexity of this, because it's worth noting that what they researched against was freelance style projects. Okay. And if you think about freelance work, it's often unique, it's messy, it's full of nuance. Freelance work is often some of the hardest kind of work to automate, because there isn't this is exactly how you work with a freelancer. That's why they're a freelancer. It's not something you do all the time. So you're basically starting from ground zero and building from the bottom up each time. If you're a freelancer, there might be components of that work, and that's where I didn't see it in the research, but it'd be interesting to see like some of the freelancers that were doing this. Where did AI come help them with some of this stuff? But it's worth noting that freelance work may not be the best comparison. And so when I see some of these headlines that are already talking about, see, AI can only automate at best 2.5% of what a human can do, cancel all full stop on automation. It's not fair to take that approach, because what I would say is you need to move from like straight up cancel automation. And so if my previous reflection, you heard me say cancel automation, that's not what I said. I said, do a full stop, a pause, an examination. Automation is still something I would not cancel, but needs to be done with surgical precision. And what I mean by that is, inside of an organization, freelance work can be unique and dynamic. And so is a lot of work inside of an organization. However, within that work, whether you're a freelancer doing it, whether you're within a corporate institution, there are repeatable micro tasks within the broad scale work that do make sense. And you need to identify them and isolate them and say, okay, maybe we can't just say, here, go create a product pitch for this product. Well, okay, yeah, that would be foolish to just toss out to AI and assume what it's going to come back with is good. But maybe the person who is responsible for doing that that team, that organization, that individual should be responsible for identifying, hey, where are there some very repeatable micro tasks that I consistently do each time? And what are they? Let me isolate those things out that are, not heavy or high risk. And then how do I surgically integrate AI tools into that? How do I have it help automate some of this so that there's still humans over the synthesis of it all, but the AI tools are automating some of the steps in between? And then not just go, hey, we did that work, Christopher, so now we're just going to like full scale push forward. Now you're going to still need to iterate and measure, is this really saving time? I've got a cartoon planned for this week that I'm going to talk, or actually I think I posted it last week. Anyway, and I'm talking about the fact that you actually have to look at this, because there are lots of times where the iteration and look, AI's automating this stuff, and you're like, well, but you spent 10 times more time working with the automation to get the product. You could have just done it. So you actually have to look at it and measure it. And just because you go, well, this is a repeatable, isolated task we're going to automate, doesn't necessarily mean it's leading to a better outcome. So as an example, there was some work I was doing with a design agency, and they actually broke down onboarding into 18 steps. We were able to break this thing out. And there were 6 of them within the 18 that were extremely repetitive. It literally was almost always the same. It never was really any different. And so what we were able to do is then we kept the humans involved in these creative parts and oversee these 6 that were automated, because you still need to spot check. You can't assume it's always going to get it perfect. It's going to mess it up. But what we saw was we were getting results 40% faster with a 12-point lift in satisfaction. And we didn't have to lay anybody off. So again, it's about improving outcomes, not necessarily doing this one-to-one swap. So going back to, and I think these are interrelated, do a full stop on any sort of automation. But with this one, do a actual workflow autopsy. And this is work everybody seems to want to kind of skip over. Well, how do we not have to do that? Because that sounds big and messy and complicated. You can't skip this step. And I think this research really emphasizes why it's so important to not skip that step. Because while it wasn't in the research, I am confident if I went and sat down and tried to investigate, hey, where did this break? The problem with AI just running off and doing it is you don't know where it broke or why or what you could have done differently, unlike when it's happening alongside people who you can work with to figure out, how to do this. So do an autopsy of the work. Don't skip that step. Map it out. Highlight where the repeats exist. Then pilot it in small automations with humans as the final QA. I talk a lot about the fact it's not about just keeping a human in the loop. It's about having the right people in the right loops at the right times with the right level of authority and decision-making power to influence this. And then really make sure you're rewarding precision, not just volume. Because I'm confident if you were to look at some of this stuff, it'd be like, yeah, maybe AI came back super fast with it. Maybe it churned this out in a fraction of the time that it took a human to do it. But based on some of the indications of it, it wasn't that big of a time savings. And when you look at what you're getting in return and then add to it the fact that I said, you're basically starting back over from ground zero, because what it generated probably netted you absolutely nothing. It's actually just piling on top of it. Now, the third one that I want to talk about, and then we'll wrap here, is that I get it may sound like from the previous 2 reflections and from the research, you go 2.5%, that's laughable, 0.8% to 2.5%. It's easy right now to take this research and say, huzzah, the humans have won. That this is so minuscule and, whatever, we have got nothing to worry about. I would caution you not to take that approach. I get 2.5% sounds tiny. And even I, scoff at it a little bit. But then when I sat with it and actually backed up a little bit and thought about where we were even a year ago, which was a year ago, it was like 0. Okay. That's a 10-fold jump. I mean, technically it's infinity if you want to go 0, but you get what I'm saying. All right. Within a year, there's a significant increase. For context, if you look at past big transformational things like this, like the internet took almost a decade to hit its first 10x in productivity. A decade. Electricity, like multiple decades. AI did it in a year. So I say that because it's easy to dismiss the 2.5% and say, great, like let's kick back, let's relax. It's going to be a long time before these machines are capable of doing anything. There's danger at the polls. And what I mean by danger at the polls is, yes, it is absolutely reckless to run in and say AI is just going to do what humans do, and we're just going to hand things over, and we're just going to not, let it do the work and have no guardrails, no human oversight. We're going to trust it with stuff. Yes, that is absolutely dangerous and reckless, and you are going to get burned big time. But the solution to that isn't to flip to the other end of the pole and go, 2.5%. This is not something I'm ever going to have to work out in my lifetime. And Christopher even said that 2.5% is very generous when compared to what people really do and all this other stuff. So I'm just going to kind of kick back and say, yep, this is just AI hype and it's going to fade into the distance. It's not. I think where the real wisdom comes is in the middle ground, which is about discernment that everybody, every organization, every leader needs to take, which is regular experimentation, but experimentation with responsibility and the ability to learn and adapt fast. And learn and adapt fast doesn't just mean take on more. It also means recognizing when, hey, we tried this. It's technically working, but what we're getting out of it is not actually more beneficial. Or maybe some other automation capability increases and you'd be better investing your resources into that and shifting things over here. Or maybe just the very nature of the dynamics of the team and the culture of your organization may have you needing to pivot and adjust and do things. There's no blueprint for this. But jumping to the poles of either all in or all out is dangerous. It's dangerous. And this will catch up. Because fear will make you slow. If you're afraid you're going to move really slow, but if you jump on the hype, and we're seeing this right now, it gets sloppy. You make mistakes you would have never made. So they're not helpful. So in terms of what you can do, how you can think about this, what actions you can take in response to this project or podcast is, let me break it down into, two different categories. If you're an individual, I would encourage you to lean in and figure out how to be a conductor with AI. Figure out how to orchestrate it. You know your work. You know what parts are repeatable. You know don't wait for your organization to tell you to do it. Don't wait for, it to get to a point where AI can technically automate 75% of human workflows. Like, do it now. Get your conductor muscles working. Validate the outputs. Experiment with some of this stuff on your own. Learn the nuance of where it does pretty good, where it doesn't do well, what kind of tweaks in your conducting you need to make it perform the way you need it to. Identify where it helps and where it hurts. Not only so you can take that into consideration in your own work, but so that you can be a voice and an advocate for it. You can start speaking intelligently about it instead of just parroting the headlines about it. I mean, it's great that you're listening to this podcast, and my goal is to inspire curiosity and critical thinking in you, but it's not so that you can just go parrot what I said back to other people. It's so that you can then take this and go do some of this work and then speak intelligently about your own personal experience with it. Now, for organizations or leaders leading those organizations, I think there's real opportunity for you to embed AI into some of the ways you're growing and developing your leaders right now. Figure out, hey, how do we actually equip our leaders to lead these kinds of things I just described in the two previous things? Because I can tell you right now, a lot of leaders are just so busy trying to keep their head above water. They're not sitting thinking about, hey, how do I not only do this orchestration for myself, but how do I actually lead this in my team? And so you as an organization have a responsibility to work that into your plans for developing your leaders and building different role-based type stuff that helps them grow and develop these skills. Now, I would be doing a disservice, and I'm not saying this just because I've created it, but that is why I developed the AI effectiveness rating, is because many people don't know even how well they're using AI themselves, or even what gaps or blind spots they have. And I created the AI effectiveness rating to help somebody in natural language talk through, what are you really doing? And then get a report back on like, hey, here's where I'm seeing you doing this. Here's where some areas where you might want to double click into this, and doing that on a personal level. Because while so many organizations right now seem committed to trying to do everything at the enterprise, are we all in on automation, or are we not all in? Are we all in on humans in the loop or not? This is a much more personal and individual transformation than many organizations recognize. And I think that's where making sure everybody in your organization understands, how capable am I? And not just based on my own interpretation. I'm a terrible judge of myself. We need something that we can objectively measure ourselves against and go, okay, there I have an opportunity area. I need to work on that. And I think that's something that, whether you use something like my AER or something else, of course I would advocate for mine, but I would say just don't skip that work, because the question's not, can AI do 5% today? It's, is your organization and are you as an individual ready when it can do 25 or 50 or 75 or 100? Will it? I don't know. And that's a conversation for a different podcast. But I think it's more about being prepared for where you'll be. Are you going to be where the puck is going, or are you just trying to get by where you are right now? Now, there you go. As we come into the home stretch on this, I get this one in particular might feel conflicting, maybe even a little dizzying, because it's like, wait a minute, I'm not sure whether to be happy about this or overwhelmed or freaked out. I get it. Every week is introducing new data. There's new models. There's different predictions. I actually felt this one was really grounding in a world where headlines are saying robots are taking over, and then the next day it says they're completely and utterly useless. I think about the NeoBot, which maybe I'll do a podcast on that one here in the future. But I think this hopefully helps you ground in some of that, because I recognize there is a lot of tension, and it's okay to feel that tension, because the reality is both can be true. Robots can be taking things over, and they can be completely useless. And I think that's actually one of the biggest risks I'm seeing day after day right now, is both of those things are true on a catastrophically dangerous level. But I think this data also gives you something solid, and that it's a reminder that clarity still exists amid the chaos, and AI is not ready to replace you, but it is moving fast enough that if you're not there, it is time to get very intentional about how you use it. So if you or your organization need any assistance in finding that balance, whether it's using AI effectively without losing what it makes your work meaningful, that's the work that I do in my consulting and executive coaching. And it's why I designed the AI effectiveness rating, to be able to give people that roadmap. And if that's something you would benefit from, my contact details are readily accessible. You can reach out at any time. But even if that's not where you're at, I hope this content helps get you to a better place, because this matters. This matters for all of us, and it's a wild time. So with that, I will see you on the other side.